Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Product in LA podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Cole, and this is an opportunity to shine the spotlight on some of the exceptional technology leaders we have as part of the LA community. With us today is actually still Travis Corrigan. This is going to be a special episode, part two of my conversation with him. It was a conversation so nice, we had to publish it twice. But before we get back to Travis, a word from our sponsors. Product in LA is brought to you by Uruit. Do you need help completing your roadmap items? Uruit is a digital product development agency with over 15 years of experience helping U.S. companies build web and mobile apps by embedding directly into their Scrum teams. Uruit's expert full-stack software developers provide quality code to help you get the job done. If you need React or Angular front-end devs, or perhaps help with Node.js, .NET, or Python development, DevOps, or even product or design to help solidify requirements, they're ready to help you close out features and actually release updates to customers. Learn more at uruit.com. That's URUIT.com. We're also brought to you by the Product Managers Association Los Angeles, available at pma.la. They are the largest professional organization for product and designers in Los Angeles. With more than 3,000 members from over 500 companies, they host monthly meetups, organize the Product Leader Council, where CPOs and heads of product connect in small 6 to 8 member pods, and have a mentorship program where they connect working product managers with students from underrepresented groups to build a better, more diverse next gen. To learn more about PMA, go to pma.la. To learn more about the mentorship program, go to pma.la/mentorship. And now, more for my conversation with Travis Corrigan. A lot of times when I have like kind of these after conversations, like there's so many gems that come out. Like
Totally.
the last one with Derek Kwan, gosh, he had a really interesting perspective. He was talking about poker and product management. And in our kind of like after talk,
Are you recording? Just hit
yeah, I'm
record.
recording. Yeah.
Okay.
And we were just chatting through and hanging out at the end. He was talking about how important it was for, regardless of whether you're doing well or not well, to repetition, to be able to replicate it. Like, and like for him, that was really important. It was like, oh no, this came out like when we were just kind of hanging out at the end. So yeah, no, it's definitely, I'm going to start recording these just in case it's something that's interesting that we want to do something with, throw it out there. But yeah, no, thank you again. Like I said, known you for 5 years, feel like I'm just meeting you, that the research is really interesting. I've heard you talk about that, 1,200 research hours before or interviews before, but I don't think I've ever put together the concept that like the reason you are doing what you're doing today is the research. I've seen you more as like a product person and kind of an organizer, and I don't know why it didn't click till now, because you've talked about like, heavy metal is absolutely a project where you want to do better user research, and you get upset that people do it so poorly, and so you're like, I can help people do this better. But I never put that together. It's really the passion that lies at the heart of it is the research. That's super interesting.
Yeah. The key thing about the research is that it is one of the few things I've found to be able to systematically bust one's blind spots. So we talk about testing assumptions, but there's a bunch of assumptions that you have that you don't know you have. And entrepreneurs spend a lot of time and money throwing shit against the wall and then looking at analytics and then not making an even better decision. Like the number of A/B tests where B beats A, the success rate on that is like 16, 17%, which means that your A probably sucks. Like your preconceived notions about what is going to work, like your prior assumptions, like you're a PhD, right? And so the number one thing you do when you write a paper is you have to state your priors. You have to state your intellectual priors,
Right.
which means that you have to find them in the first place. But most founders don't realize they have priors. They've just put together a couple of different concepts and then spend a bunch of money trying to put that stuff together before they even really find out that it works. And there's something that I love saying is just like user study will, 4 months of product development will save you 2 weeks of user research, right? And that, a lot of people are like, oh, well, we just got to build, measure, learn. I was like, what if you could just do learn first? The learn part is free. It's called Google Scholar. It's also called having 10 interviews. And pretty quickly, there's a lot of empirical evidence that after about the fifth interview, you found mostly 80% of the unique insights you're going to have for that version of the product or that version of the line of questioning that you're looking at. So it really doesn't take too much. And there's sort of a meta blind spot I think a lot of people have is we have this bias for quantitative information because we all had a stats professor that said if the sample size is less than 30, it doesn't matter.
That's not statistically relevant.
Not statistically relevant. But what they didn't say is that it's still pragmatically relevant,
Huh.
right? We
Huh.
tend we all pray at the altar of statistical significance, but that only gives you confidence that the direction you're in is good. It doesn't tell you what direction to go in. That's qualitative. Qualitative is like a compass. Statistical, quantitative is about how thick the line is once you've picked a direction, right? So you need both, honestly. And I really got this at Beachbody because I got to wear a lot of hats. I was employee 6 at that division,
Wow.
and by the time I left, we had 250, and we had gone from
Wow.
6 to 150 in 18 months. We did 11 product launches in 11 months. It was bonkers. It was insane. And during that time, I consulted 2 product. I had this like nebulous title called director of strategy, which effectively was just like, we need Travis just to be smart on anything that he can be, Travis to be Travis rather, maybe not necessarily smart. And so I was doing qualitative research, user research. I also was responsible for the data layer and all of the analytics for Beachbody On Demand. So I was the business intelligence quant guy
Okay.
and the user researcher qual guy at the same time. And so I got to see how insights and interesting little patterns that I would have when I would bring people in to do user interviews would spark the idea for how to query the quantitative data differently than I would have thought about it before. And no amount of like querying the data would have helped me find a new way to ask that question. Right. And so oftentimes we really think about in research, we think about finding the answer because we want to be right about our ideas.
Right.
But I find, and that's a very natural place to be as a human. But if you get stuck in like all my ideas need to be right, otherwise, my identity sort of collapses in and of itself. You're never really going to graduate to where you can really be super effective, which is my ideas are maybe at best hints at things to investigate further. And what I find in user research is that it not only answers some questions, but the real value of it is it helps me come up with better questions.
Mm.
And the better questions help me in either follow-on user research interviews or investigating quantitative data differently, applying a different lens to the quantitative data than other people have applied to it, right? So it's this sort of novel perspective. This is for me, I think user research is like one systematic way to come up with contrarian views that happen to be empirically right, because they're hiding in plain sight. And the reason why they're right is they were right all along. We just were invisible to them because they were hiding in plain sight. And so I think that superpower, I think, of having a system of overcoming one's own blind spots is amazing. And there's a study which has one of my favorite titles. I'll give you the actual title and then I'll tell you what it means. Is like um, cognitive sophistication does not attenuate cognitive bias, which is another way of saying you can't outsmart your blind spots.
Huh.
And the effectiveness, what's effectively saying is this: is that it's part position paper, part literature review, and they did like a dozen experiments to just write this one paper.
Okay.
And so what they looked at is they gave a bunch of people cognitive ability tests, and then they give them a bunch of other things that test for bias. And what we found is that your intelligence is a function of how much data you can process. So imagine that
Mm.
your brain is like a pipe, and people whose brain architecture can't process a lot of information will miss things that people with bigger pipes will see, right? Sort of the difference between if you sort of just like put a smaller pipe inside of a bigger pipe, the difference is that. And so
Right.
smart people with bigger pipes tend to think that they have less bias than people with smaller pipes because they see things that people with smaller pipes don't see.
Right.
That's a totally different thing than thinking about where that pipe should be pointed in the first place.
Huh.
It's like, I've got a bigger telescope than you. I'm like, great, you're pointing it in the wrong direction. Like, it doesn't matter if you're, it's not about whether you're smarter or not. It's about whether or not you're actually adapting to the situation on the ground. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's probably, in fact, what we found in the paper is that people who are smarter tend to have bigger blind spots and they tend to be more committed to not discovering those blind spots
Yeah.
because their intelligence, yeah, makes them they
Yeah.
part of their identity is I'm smarter, I see more than other people do. And then when someone's like, "No, you don't see everything though." And they go, "I don't like you." And their ego kicks in.
Yeah.
And so for me, that the user research it's like a safety net that I use to make sure I don't get too high on my horse or too high in my saddle about what I think I know about a problem. Almost to the point that when I step in, like I said, I think earlier in the episode, it's just like I don't even pretend anymore like I know. But
Yeah.
I what I do sell, and this is what I sell to people, is like I'm not going to sell you an answer. I'm going to sell you a systematic, rigorous method to finding the right answer, which, by the way, isn't going to be any of the ones that we think it's going to be, but it's probably going to be the right one.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so the research is more about being less wrong than it is about being anything else.
I want to go back because I want to make sure I got this right. Did you say that most A/B tests tell you that the B is correct?
That the B is not correct.
The B is not correct.
Yeah. So most A/B tests perform worse than a coin flip.
Why and why is that?
Well, because um, um, so we have a lot of talk over the last decade from lean startup about hypothesis testing.
Okay.
And if you read that book, it's all about ways in which to test your hypotheses. So it's given that your hypothesis is worth testing, but as you know, uh, experiments, these kinds of experiments are a garbage in, garbage out problem. Meaning,
Right.
if your hypothesis sucks, your data is going to also suck.
Yeah.
The problem is that there's nothing in your data that's going to tell you about how to get your hypothesis better. And so, um, so the thing that Eric failed to recognize is that there are decades of rigorous methodology that we have figured out about how to use data-driven methods to develop hypotheses. Is that we were like, oh yeah, we test our hypotheses. I was like, okay, well, where do hypotheses come from? Right. It's like the kid asking mom and dad, like, mom, where do babies come from? Right. Do the storks deliver them? I have an equivalent question to all the lean startup people. I'm like, where do hypotheses come from?
Huh.
Well, where they come from is your head, which is a function of your anecdotal, subjective experience of the world up to that point. And so there's a couple of biases embedded in almost every hypothesis that go unchecked. And one of that is called false consensus bias, which is we tend to think false consensus is that I tend to think falsely that more people have consensus with my way of thinking than not, which
Okay.
is that like I tend to, by the way, this is a feature, not a bug. It's a bug that is a feature of human cognition, is that we tend to think that more people agree with us than don't. So when you have a founder who's going, we should make it like this, and we should make it like this because I'm solving my own problem. It's like, well, great. The way that you wanted that problem solved is probably generalizes less to the way other people want it solved than you think it does.
Yeah.
And if you don't have some mechanism in place like user research to counterbalance that bias or point that out to you, you're going to waste a lot of money following that rabbit hole down.
Wow.
There's another bias called attribution error, which is when we evaluate the behavior of other people, we tend to think that their behavior is a function of their innate character, not a function of their situation. And so an example of this is like if I show up late to a meeting, most people will think that's because I can't have my shit together. I just like I that I'm a sloppy, disorganized person.
Right.
Um, if you show up late for a meeting, you're gonna be like, sorry, like there was traffic and like the parking lot attendant couldn't like do some stuff or any of that. It was about the situation. It was about and things that were happening to you in the environment that your behavior is a byproduct of the environment you're operating in. And we tend to think that people's behaviors are a function of who they are, not a
Mm,
reaction to the situations that they happen to find themselves
that's
in.
interesting.
And that's actually why personas don't work, period. Like if you come up with a persona that is at best like the Harry Potter version of like what your customers actually are. Like it's a very fancy fiction. It just
So you're anti-persona.
I am not anti-persona, actually. I think that personas should be built starting with a behavior, and then you look at what are interesting clusters of characteristics.
Mm,
So personas start with characteristics, and then they use that to predict behaviors,
okay.
and that's just empirically the wrong way to do that. I just look at the entire literature of Kahneman and Tversky just shows that like what we think about other people is a very poor predictor about future behavior.
Huh.
Um, and so those two biases happen a lot. Like that, those are embedded in any decision that a founder or a product person is going to make. And if you don't have a method for popping your own blind spot bubbles, you are like probably going to be performing worse than a coin flip, right? We see that with the A/B tests. We say that with the profound failure of startups, which is that you probably should just not do that idea at all,
Huh.
right? It's just like most of them shouldn't exist, and that's why they fail. And there's another reason why they
Right.
fail, which has everything to do about how well founders get along, but I think that's sort of out of the scope of this conversation. But that's so the reason why A/B tests fail is that A is your hypothesis, and B, and so if you don't have a really great hypothesis or you came upon it based on luck, you're gonna have a bunch of myth making about why that works. You're gonna have a bunch of myth making about the causality of that thing. And this is what I love about user research is that you get to ask why things happen. You get to
Mm,
observe people do things. You don't have to sort of intuit what you think happened or why it happened and then write a query to analyze and filter your analytics data, right?
yeah.
And so it's the bias piece is that we miscalculate and misjudge what other people will like we misjudge the behavior of other people, like what they will do, and we totally misjudge why they do it. And as a feature of being human. And if you don't, again, have uh, some sort of structure in place or mechanism in place to protect you from yourself,
Yeah.
then you're going to be making decisions that are like if they work out, it's probably because of luck or privilege, honestly. And for me, I really did not want. I wanted to be better than a coin toss, in
Yeah.
my career. Like, VCs will be like, "Oh yeah, well, make 20 investments, and then one works out and sort of pays for the rest." And I go, "Great," but what about the ones that don't work out? Like, what happens to their lives where the ones didn't work out, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to be the one that doesn't work out. All 20 of those founders thought they were going to be the one, and yet here we sit. And
Yeah.
like, I only have one life. I can't restart the next 10 years. Right. And so I want to, reduce as much as possible. And I think I said earlier about being less wrong. Um, I think that's the goal. I think there was a great Bill Belichick quote from a long time ago, which is just like, in order to start winning, you have to first stop losing.
Huh.
And I find that user research is really good at isolating what clearly should not be done. Um, and oftentimes, what clearly should not be done was the favorite, the favorite pet project of what should be done by some designer or some founder or some executive. So yeah, it's a great way to sort of develop contrarian views that tend to be more right than not.
That's incredible, man. Well, yeah. Thank you again,
Yeah.
Travis.
Thanks for letting me
Super
go on my
fun.
diatribe.
No, it's
It's
super.
a thing I've thought a lot about, obviously.
No, it's fun to listen to it, man. Fun to
Yeah.
talk to you
Well,
about it.
I mean, you've done a PhD. So like a PhD is 4 years of doing this kind of work, right? Like
It's
where
like 8 years, man.
it's well, yeah, depending on how it is. So was it, remind me of your PhD again? Anthropology?
Art history,
Art
technically,
history. Yeah.
it is
Still,
archaeology. It's really archaeology. So it's the art and culture of of a group that was pre-Inca in Peru. So think
mm,
400 to 600 was kind of like their best time. I think maybe up to 800, and then massive collapse after 800.
what happened? What caused the collapse?
It was El Nino. It was
Oh,
environmental related. Actually, it was like following Katrina. I was like concerned for the United States because this was a culture where their biggest thing they ever created, like their biggest building, biggest pyramid, was pretty sizable. It's huge. I mean, what would it be compared to? It'd be compared to like a full block length, maybe 6-story building. So like a pretty sizable thing for just people without the help of the wheel doing things, right? Um, there was a huge, massive rain and flood, and they expended a lot of resources to rebuild. And then it happened again like 3 years later, and then it seems like they couldn't recover from that one. It was just like they put all their energy going back into it. So it's so far so good. But when they rebuilt, and this could be controversial, but when they rebuilt New Orleans after that last time, it was like, well, it's under sea level. It's in a great place for hurricanes. Like, do we really, is it the best use of our resources to rebuild this city in the same location? Or do we potentially learn from this thing? So far, 12 years later, it's still okay. But I, I'm still concerned that we keep pumping resources. Like when like huge natural disasters strike, major areas that are like prone to this problem.
Manhattan,
Yeah, well,
Houston.
probably Florida, probably Miami, probably be another one
Oh,
coming up.
yeah. I mean, the entirety. I've seen research that like 70-80% of Florida will be underwater and by 2060 or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's like
Which
if
is honestly not a big loss for me personally, but
I'm a Florida Gator, so there's parts of it I still
oh,
love.
sure, yeah,
But
no,
but at the same time, I was in that area at that time. It's like, whoa, like we're gonna have limited resources as we move forward. So is it? I know people like are attached to the place they grew up and they don't want to leave, but like if nature is either changing or if it's just kind of like whatever, if we're just in like an epoch that the climate is different for what it is, um, then is it worth putting all this money back into it with the very likely probability that there will be another hurricane in New Orleans? It will flood again.
mhm.
Like Miami is very close to the water table, like the water level. Like if it flooded, do we really need to put all that money into that one place? Or can we like learn as a culture and as a society, like, okay, well, let's go to the places that are more forgiving, which
Mhm.
unfortunately in LA is like, oh shit, well, I'm asking for more people to come here. But like, uh, if that means that we're not losing $60 billion a year for rebuilding other places that we're going to need it again, no matter what, like, yeah, maybe we could have some skyscrapers here. I mean, that would be a better answer.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be a less controversial thing, going for I mean, probably you use the word controversial, it's probably controversial at the time, but I think in retrospect with everything that happened with New York, with Houston, um,
Yeah.
where I mean, walking I think it's it that looks pretty prescient a pretty prescient question, less controversial in retrospect. I think, uh, to your point, it's an interesting parallel because as I was walking in here, I was quickly responding to my team on Slack and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, the rain has really picked up. And I looked up at my windshield. I'm like, oh, that's hail. I'm in Manhattan Beach in Los Angeles and it's hailing.
I had to remember the word for sleet.
Right.
I was like, oh wait, it's not really hail. It's not freezing rain, because I know freezing rain's when it like falls from the sky. And I
Then it
used to live
freezes.
on the East Coast. I used to go to school in upstate New York. These are things I used to have in the back of my hand.
Oh,
But yeah, I was like, oh, this is sleet. This is sleeting. It's like kind of slush coming from the sky. It's
mm-hmm.
not rain. It's
Mm-hmm.
not snow, and it's not. It weren't at the point I saw it. It wasn't like hail balls that were sticking. It was like slush coming on the window. But yeah, Manhattan Beach at,
2 o'clock in the afternoon.
2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's wild.
Yeah. And it was amazing driving from Santa Monica. I had to get on the 10 to the 405 South. And so I was pointed eastward towards downtown
Okay.
and I saw the mountains behind them. And I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
is that snow?
Yeah.
That was the first time I have seen that much, like I've seen snow there, or that much snow on those mountains. And I was like, that's all right. It's getting hard to ignore now. But yeah, I think, the quirk, we only do things when we feel like them. And oftentimes we only do things when we feel like the work of working towards the upside is better than preventing the downside, right? Like we're
Yeah.
only going to do things when we all have our own inner economist in our head. And there's a really awesome research paper called Neural Predictors of Purchases from 2006, which shows the actual brain mechanisms in the midbrain, how people look at a product and then look at a price and what's flashing on in their heads. And it's a fascinating thing around human behavior is that like we only at the end of the day we only do it because we feel like it. The reasons
Huh.
why we make up for that are mostly just stories. They have very little predictive value. What people is why in user research it's really important to do both, to ask them what they're thinking and why they thought they did that, but you have to calibrate that. You have to balance that with what you observe them actually doing. And I've done this. I'm sure I don't know if you've seen this. You've done this in research you've done, but like I will watch somebody contradict themselves 4 or 5 times in the same session. And as a researcher, you can't pop that bubble for them because then they're going to suddenly be reminded that they're being watched again, and they're going to start like
Right.
filtering their answers to you, which is not very helpful for you. But I think I think it's that. I think a lot of PMs and a lot of user researchers and a lot of founders wish that wasn't the case for humans. I think they don't want to live in a world where that happens to be the case. And I think a great competitive advantage is if you embrace it and you embrace the messiness, you embrace the contradictions, and what I always say is that a contradiction is just simply a shared, uh, like all things that two a contradiction are two branches that have a shared root that you can't see. And I think that's I think that's a cool. I think that whenever you see contradictions, whenever you see, wow, why are people just not doing this? That's an opportunity to go deeper. And usually when you go deeper, you find a really elegantly simple solution to a really thorny problem.
Interesting.
And I think that for me is also the attraction to sort of a lot of this research is that it's like treasure hunting.
That's incredible, man. And there you have it. A few extra innings here with Travis and I. So many terrific ideas came out of that. Glad we could share that with you all. Want to thank Travis again for being on the show. Also like to thank our sponsors, PMALA and Uruit. And we'd like to thank you all for joining us one more time. We'll catch you next time on Product in LA.